Hi, I'm John Persinos, editor-in-chief of Aircraft Value News and a contributing editor at Avionics International Report. Welcome to my latest expert Q&A. With me today is Tony Karafiat. Tony is director of asset evaluation at Avitas, a leading aviation consulting firm in Fairfax, Virginia. Tony also is a CFA and CPA. At Avitas, Tony's duties include the preparation of appraisals, market analysis, aircraft studies, strategic planning, and financial analysis. So I think that Tony is more than qualified to speak to us today about the state of aircraft values and lease rates. Tony, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, of course, Sean. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's get right to it. With talk of renewed tariffs, signs of resurgent inflation in some regions, and a broader global economic slowdown, how are these macro headwinds affecting aircraft valuations and lease negotiations, especially for cross-border deals? Or am I being a little bit too pessimistic about the state of the global economy? Give us some context.
Sure, John. It's a great question. And what's great about working in aviation is that we're a global industry that faces these types of challenges every day. So I'll try and paint a picture of what the industry was looking like coming into 2025 before these macro changes were introduced. And you're right. I don't know if you're necessarily pessimistic, but I think a lot of what's happening right now is going to be muted compared to the overall industry coming into the year. So if you think about the demand for air travel and commensurately the demand for aircraft was really strong. 2024 was a really strong year for the industry with air travel demand surpassing 2019 levels by 4%. Airlines earned net profits of 30 billion globally for the second consecutive year, which is consistent with the back half of the 2010s. So really strong environment for the airlines. A lot of economic optimism coming into the year with unemployment still very low, and really a big catalyst from Asia Pacific where that traffic's been accelerating faster than the rest of the world. So on top of all this high demand, you have a really constrained supply of aircraft, which has a double whammy for our business here at Avitas on aircraft values. So you have this undersupplied fleet where the full production has not recovered after the shutdown that happened back in 2020.
Right.
And we're thinking that it may not recover until 2028. So you see on the supply side that a lot of things that you've seen, the GTF engine has really pushed things aside for Airbus on their deliveries. On Boeing, we all know about the constraints on production of the MAX aircraft and even the LEAP. We had Airbus here at our office last week, and they were saying that they had 60 gliders at the end of June waiting for LEAP engines. So for both manufacturers across the board, there's millions of parts that go into producing a single aircraft, and just getting all those pieces together, all the suppliers, all the staffing, all the material, have really, really hampered production. And so when you combine those two pieces, this high demand for aircraft and the reduced supply, what you're really seeing is that retirements have been delayed, older assets are flying for longer, leases are being extended, and airlines are sourcing their aircraft from the secondary market rather than directly from the OEMs. And so what you're seeing is so much of this supply and demand imbalance coming into the year. These macro factors that you're introducing between the tariffs and the inflation and any potential global slowdown isn't really enough to offset this sort of really strong market for used aircraft. And so our team at Avitas, including our president, Ann Pilarski, and our senior economist, Teresa Rothschild, they would say no, that those three pieces are not enough to really move the needle. And maybe stepping through those on the inflation side, inflation was as high as 4% back in 2024 globally.
Right.
And in April and June, as low as the mid twos in the US. So really seeing an improvement on the inflation side. Tariff policy has really put in some uncertainty amongst the economy at large, and we're thinking it's going to put some upward pressure on CPI. We expect to see some short-term stagflation, but on the airline side, I would say there are going to be inflationary pressures from labor and MROs, and you're seeing the MROs having record revenues with Standard Aero was up double digits year over year. Delta Tech Ops are really strong. Performance, GE the same way. So inflationary pressures we expect to continue, but in some ways, those higher maintenance costs are going to produce higher aircraft values.
It begs the question, which aircraft models, specific models, are you seeing that the most pronounced rise or fall in base values and leasing rates? Where have there been the most dramatic changes in certain aircraft models?
Sure, sure. And John, I'd agree with you. I saw you had an article on Aircraft Value News just a couple days ago where you were showcasing midlife narrow bodies
Right.
performing really well in this market, and we would agree. We're hearing a lot of lessors saying that their lease extensions at the end of 2024, early 25 were coming in at a renewal rate north of 90%. With rare exceptions where they weren't, they were placed at operators that increased yields or gave them the opportunity to decrease credit risk. So you're really seeing strength in that midlife narrow body space. As an example, we saw old generation narrow body market values at a 15% premium to base values.
Hmm.
And 3 years ago, those base values were even with the market. On the wide body side, the A350-900 and the 789s have climbed at a similar rate of change in the low teens over that same time frame. And so now those assets, the market values and base values are pretty close to each other.
How's the ongoing production slowdown at Boeing? All the regulatory and safety and reputational woes at Boeing, especially around the MAX, affecting the value of older 737 NGs and their lease rates in the secondary market.
Sure. There's roughly 3,000 unfilled orders for the MAX 8 and 9, not to mention the another 1,500 for the uncertified 7s and 10s. So that backlog back in 2001 for Boeing would have been about a 3-year backlog, but now that backlog is almost 8 years. So it's incredible how much has changed
Right.
over the last 2 decades. And to Boeing's credit, they've been really working closely with the FAA, working closely with their suppliers, and they've been increasing production rates. Just in 2Q, it was announced that they shipped out 102 MAX aircraft, and the street was expecting a consensus of 98. So slowly ticking up and slowly improving on those deliveries. But um, when you follow those delays through to the market, it's not enough to support what's needed to fly our global airline base, right? So we're seeing lease rates for midlife NGs and CEOs that are north of 40% higher over the
Hmm.
last 3 years.
Wow.
Maxes and Neos have also been climbing, but only 25%. So you're really seeing this theme consistent with the article that you had produced that these midlife assets, these used COs and NGs are really strong right now. It's a good place to be.
The A321 XLR, it's generating a lot of buzz among airlines. From an appraisal standpoint, is the aircraft living up to the hype in terms of value, retention, and lease demand?
Sure, John, and another great article that you produced on this topic just a couple days ago. And there's been a lot of buzz amongst airlines around this aircraft. Iberia took 8 of these and was a launch customer back in November. IAG ordered another 6 with Aer Lingus. A lot of excitement around what sort of routes that you can serve on these long and thin markets. I know United, back when I was there, they've got an order for 50 of those XLRs that they were hoping would show up in January. They're now going to show up in the summer of 2026, maybe after the summer. And you're going to see a lot of interest on this unique niche that it's going to be able to fill, right? So we think it's going to be a successful aircraft for Airbus. But the niche is not that big. So there's only about 500 on order compared to the rest of the A320neo family, where that order book is 7,000, right? So you're seeing the market potential is limited. Is it still going to compete with the A330s and the MAX 10s? So we'd say overall, too early to tell on lease demand value and retention, to your point, as there's only been a few deliveries, but we're excited to stay tuned.
Okay. Cargo conversions and freighters like the 747-400 BCF and the A300-600 RF, they seem to be holding value surprisingly well. What's your take on the freighter market in the latter half of 2025 and beyond?
Sure, sure. So what we're seeing is a real strength in cargo demand and a lack of wide body supply. And really that started back during the pandemic, where historically cargo capacity, about half of it came from freighters and the other half came from the belly of passenger travel. And that really swung during COVID to be 70% of that capacity coming from freighters. And so now we're seeing that slowly trickling down. It's now back around the low 60s, but you're still seeing this mismatch that things have not quite worked out, and so there's a pretty high demand for wide body capacity. And so you're right, we're seeing those 747-400 freighters doing really well. We expect the BCF is going to be replaced eventually by the 777-300 ERF when that type enters service. But then if you have a subsequent fall in cargo demand, that's probably when you'll see that aircraft exit the fleet entirely. On the other hand, the 747 factory freighter, the 400F, we think that one can remain in service a little bit longer due to its nose door, which really lets you load some unique freight that the BCF can't carry and really not a lot of other freighters in the world can offer. So as long as there's engines to support that platform, we'd expect there to be an interest in those planes. For the A300s, to your point, also a strong market for those RFs. There's about 140 of those serving a different mission, with the average age being about 25, 26 years old. And what we're seeing is that some of those older vintage aircraft are retiring, and those values are actually a little bit lower than those at the end of the production line. In a more general sense, I would say wide body freighters are retiring faster than they're being replenished. So you think about there's about 600 aircraft across three types. There's all the variants of the 747. There's the 777 freighter. Those two make up about 90% of the market. And then there's some MD-11s that make up the residual. And we would agree with Atlas Air's CEO, who was recently quoted as saying that wide body freighter capacity is going to struggle to keep up with demand growth, and that he's also expecting that there's going to be this gap of about a year between when the 777F ends production and when the 777-8F and the A350F are able to come online. So the 777F, as you know, is mandated to end in 2027 by the ICAO. And after that, you'll have two new offerings of assembly line freighters that can help replace these aging aircraft. And then there's also going to be three conversion providers on the 777-300ER between Mammoth, IAI, and KMC, but all three of those, they still don't have certificates yet. So we're waiting for that to happen. And it's hard to say how strong the feedstock will be. So if you were to talk to my friend Todd Crabtree over at Transport Research, he'd say there's such a high demand in the passenger space right now that it's going to be a lot easier for lessors to refresh a cabin than it is to cut out a cargo door. So I think there's going to be a lot of demand for wide body freighters for the foreseeable future.
What role does used aircraft inventory play in assessing aircraft values right now? And are we in a lessor's or a buyer's market?
Sure, John. Yeah, in a given year, I'd say lessors trade about 10 to 15% of their portfolio, and it's all dependent on the specific investment thesis that they have. But as we spoke about earlier, those midlife aircraft are really seeing strong residual values. They're seeing high extension rates, increasing market lease rate factors, and all those are hallmark signs of healthy liquidity in the market. And so it's really a great time to own aircraft. Whether you're an airline that's looking to do a sale leaseback or a lessor who's renewing a lease, you're really seeing high demand and strong economic terms for those with access to the metal.
You know, there's a real backlog in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul sector, and there's also a shortage of mechanics. How is that affecting values and lease rates? And do you see any relief on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. You're totally right. So since 2019, traffic demand has now exceeded those levels, right? And demand for aftermarket services has surged as a result. And you're seeing strong revenues from all of these MROs, from Standard Aero, from GE and RTX, from Delta Tech Ops. They're all having strong years in Q1 and Q2 earnings that have come out so far. And as my colleague Tim Scott would tell you, the lines are full. The turn times are coming down. It's not really what it was pre-pandemic, but call it 90 days for a shop visit last year was close to a year or 200 days, depending on what sort of engine you were looking for. But um, the biggest reason for these backlogs is these unexpected removals. On the narrow body side, it's what we talked about earlier, these powdered metal issues with the Pratt 1000s and to a smaller extent the Vs and the Pratt 2s. But um, really, when I was at ISTAT back in March, Rick Derlew got on stage and he said they've got three different stakeholders that they really got to account for. They've got to address new deliveries, they've got to produce spares, and they have to produce for these grounded GTFs. Now they know that those grounded aircraft, once they complete the tech insertion, that's a temporary issue. So they're really not incentivized to expand their capacity, increase hiring, and and scale up to address that, but rather it's these really long backlogs. So you're right, like right now, you're seeing this shortage of available engines, which has put a premium on aircraft. And we think there is some relief coming on the horizon from
Good.
this acute issue. Maybe in the next 2 years or so, we'd see those GTFs coming back online and them getting through that backlog. The next big challenge that they're going to have to confront over the next coming years is this switch over to the new engine technology.
Mhm.
So on the CFM side, moving from the CFM 56 to the LEAP and moving from the Vs to the GTF, right? So today, talking about CFM maybe specifically, there's 23,000 engines in service between the 5B and 7Bs. And by 2034, there's still going to be 13,000 of those on wing, which is a forecast from Aviation Week. So those engines aren't going away anytime soon. And yet, as soon as 2026, you may have shop visits for the LEAP engine equivalent to the CFM. And no engine program has really been introduced as quickly as the LEAP, right? The 7Bs took 15 years in order before they delivered 1,000 engines in a year. And the LEAP did it in only three.
Mm. Final question. Over the next 3 to 5 years, which aircraft families, whether it's from Airbus or Boeing or Embraer or emerging manufacturers like Comac, which aircraft families do you see gaining the most momentum in terms of base values and leasing premiums?
Sure, John. It's a great final question. It really ties together some of the earlier points we discussed, right? So with the NGs and COs, we saw those lease rates 40% higher over the last 3 years, but those new tech narrow bodies up only 25% over that same time frame, like I talked about before. And so we'd expect if that supply and demand imbalance is the same as it is today, that we expect these older generation aircraft to continue to appreciate at a faster clip than these new deliveries. And so as more airlines and lessors are waiting for the new tails to arrive, it really puts a premium on the used aircraft in the market. So I would say eventually there's probably a point that the market isn't willing to bear much more of an increase in price. And some of that could be these old aircraft. You're probably not going to see them be as expensive as the new deliveries, right? So there's going to be a ceiling for the old tails. And also, I would say that higher interest rates and the ability to finance these aircraft is also going to put some downward pressure on those prices. But I would say in the near term, the highest acceleration is still going to be in those mid-life aircraft, particularly in the narrow body space.
Okay. Tony, that was very authoritative. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and I know our viewers are going to gain a lot of insights by watching this. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Well, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. And if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to send an email to me at jpersinos@accessintel.com.